Okay, this morning we're going to talk about its war. And when I say it's war about everything. It's a war in geopolitics, it's a war in the culture, and it's a war in the church, and it's a war on the truth. And I think you'll see some examples of that today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back. I'm going to take a look at some of the things from 2016, and then I have a little bit for today. I don't know how long this will take. I'm probably less organized today than I've ever been just because I try to keep up on things, and there's a lot of things happening in the world. And there's things happening even this morning as I was driving to church. There were things popping into my news feed. So let's go back and look at some of the big things from a year ago, some of the themes over 2016. I was going to do an update and call it the decade that was 2016 because of all the things that happened in that year, but I didn't get that done, so we're going to do a little bit of it today. It was a year ago, I started off with this clip from our favorite priestess of culture, Oprah Winfrey, interviewing Rob and Kristen Bell. Rob Bell used to be, he was called, in Time Magazine, they did a top people in evangelicalism a number of years ago. He was in I think the top 10. He was called an evangelical rock star. And this is what he says now when he's talking about gay marriage. This was 1 year ago on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday or whatever it is.
When is the church going to get that?
We're close.
I think it's evolving. I think it's...
Lots of people are already there. We think it's inevitable, and we're moments.
Moments away from the church
absolutely.
It.
Absolutely.
Really?
So I say
You think we're moments away?
I think culture is already there, and the church will continue to be even more irrelevant when it quotes letters from 2,000 years ago as their best defense. The church will continue to be even more irrelevant when it quotes letters from 2,000 years ago as their best defense.
And that's what he said. Now listen, if you followed Rock Bell for any length of time at all, which I did, you would know that should not be surprising to you. But many evangelicals were, I just can't believe what happened to Rob Bell. He went that way over a decade ago, folks. And so when he came out, I mean, people in his own church, the guy who succeeded him as pastor at that church, or whatever it is up there in Michigan, said, Rob Bell came out with a thing where he says he doesn't believe in hell anymore, and everybody was surprised. We knew that around here for years. In other words, he duped a lot of people. And now he he made a lot of money and he surfs out there in, I don't know, Santa Monica or wherever he lives. So, another thing that's sort of related to that in terms of same-sex marriage is these regulations that were issued, these letters that went out from the Department of Justice telling schools that you have to have same-sex or trans, people can go to any bathroom they want, depending on the sex that they identify each day. That's a war on the truth. Sex is sort of defined at birth. Now, look, there are a few rare exceptions where it's, people are born with birth defects and that type of thing. But by and large, people are born male or female. Pretty clear. And to deny that is to deny science. It's to deny truth. And so when these regulations were coming out, Charles Krauthammer, who I think he's an atheist, even he sees through this. This is what he said on Fox when they were telling schools what they wanted to do, and the NBA was taking things away from Charlotte because Charlotte was allowing didn't want this to happen, so they passed a law down there, and they're still fighting about it. So here's what Krauthammer had to say.
Well, look, on one level you could say it's a fairly small problem, tiny population, but there's something very large at stake here, and that is that the federal government is unilaterally decreeing, without a debate, without consulting with Congress, that as of now, sex is no longer, or gender is no longer a fixed category, as we have assumed for, say, 5,000 years, but actually is a matter of declaration, of preference. That is a huge step. It's going to have a lot of implications in the future. Again, this is a rather trivial issue, the use of the bathrooms, in comparison with other items on our agenda. It's important to the individuals involved. But this is a major change on how we view one of the defining aspects of any person. And I think it deserves a lot more than simply a declaration that unless you accept the idea that you can declare yourself a man on a Monday and a woman on a Wednesday, and it's completely up to you, that unless you accept that, you are a bigot, and you are acting like the segregationist in the South 60 years ago. I think that is a huge step, and the use of the power of the federal government to bully, I think that's the right word, to enforce this, I think is disgraceful. It just shows how the arrogance of an administration unilaterally sort of overriding federalism, the separation of powers, we already know about that, is a terrible example for the future.
And he's right. And we'll wrap this up at the end because I think this ties into the conclusion that I have for today's update. Another thing that we noticed was that there was a developing war on cash. And so at Davos, at the World Economic Forum last year, this is what one of the bankers that was there had to say.
But we do worry about cash because I think that should be dematerialized. I think the world has enough robust technology.
Right.
And I think governments would be interested in that because, I mean, it's the old adage that the money launderer's greatest friend is the 500 euro note because it's anonymous and it's a relatively large denomination. It would be better if everything were traceable.
And so they went on, they had another person there said, yeah, we got to get rid of money. Everything will be digital soon. And listen, how exactly this plays into the mark of the beast and all that is still open, I think, for some debate. But it's clearly something that's moving that direction. And so I expect pretty soon that, you know, certainly 50s and 100s are going to be pretty much banned from commerce here in the United States. You'll be able to exchange them, I guess, for a little while. And then you'll have to do 10s, and I even think the $20 bill will go away because the government wants to control everything. They want to make sure they get their cut, you know, because it's important that the government, whenever you go buy something, you know, you pay, you know, every now and then I look at the sales tax and it's like, what is it, 8% around here in Columbus? And it's like, what did the government do? Why do they get an 8% cut of every transaction? I mean, really, I would like to have an 8% cut of every transaction. I'd be doing this from, you know, Costa Rica or someplace. No offense. It's 5 degrees out there this morning, folks. You know what I'm talking about. Another war on the truth is the denial of the characteristics of one major religion. And this is a speech he gave at a mosque in Baltimore, the Islamic Center of Baltimore, Maryland, about February.
Let's start with this fact. For more than 1,000 years, people have been drawn to Islam's message of peace. And the very word itself, Islam, comes from salam, peace. The standard greeting is, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. And like so many faiths, Islam is rooted in a commitment to compassion and mercy and justice and charity.
Really? Go away. I'd contribute to a fund for him to go on a permanent vacation. I really would. I mean, we've already contributed 100 million. What's another 100 million to actually make it accomplish? But he's going to be living in D.C. They're building a wall around his house, and he's not going away. But to show you the war on the truth, this is what took place at a conference on extremism, countering extremism at the White House, because of course they won't say the name. Unfortunately for the White House, and I want you to watch Barack Obama and Susan Rice sitting across the table from Hollande from France, and he's gonna say the truth. But watch what happens. You'll see the transcript with the closed captioning, but then it'll go silent for a while. And just watch their faces.
But we're also well aware that the roots of terrorism.
Et nous devons agir en Irak et en Syrie. C'est ce que nous faisons dans le cadre de la coalition. Et,
Do you see how it is when he's talking about Islamist terrorism? They
We
cut out the
note
interpreter.
that Daesh is losing
And what
ground
they
thanks
also
to the
did,
strike.
okay, because she's there, and they continued with the closed captioning. Now, I was able to get the video before that part was edited out. So if you go to the White House website today, that part of what the president of France said is gone. And because this is what leftists do. They alter history and the truth. Yeah, and I mean, Susan Rice is over there like, where's the kill button? That I remember, I think it was one of the villains in Batman, like King Tut, he had a button and people would kind of go down a chute away from him whenever he didn't like what they were saying, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I kind of have a memory of some evil guy on TV doing that. Here's our friend, a guy I met just about a couple weeks before he gave this news conference in Washington about his book, See Something, Say Nothing, Phil Haney. Praise God for men like Phil Haney who are willing to stand up and speak the truth. And Phil's a good Bible prophecy teacher. He's in the Word. He knows the Word of God. He's a great student of the Word. I've been able to spend some time with him and just talk about the Scripture and that type of thing. Great guy. Here's what he had to say a little bit about what was going on.
The thing in Orlando is like a radioactive spill from a nuclear power plant. It's part of a network that's spread across the entire United States.
Okay, let's try that again.
The thing in Orlando is like a radioactive spill from a nuclear power plant.
Hey, hang on a second here. I don't have as much tape up here this week as I usually do to keep that in place. Okay, so here we go again.
The thing in Orlando is like a radioactive spill from a nuclear power.
Hang on a second here. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Pretend all that didn't happen.
The thing in Orlando is like a radioactive spill from a nuclear power plant. It's part of a network that's spread across the entire United States. And this is one of the points I want to try to make. Every time we see an act of terrorism in the United States, the finger eventually always goes to ISIS. This network is not even Arabic. This is Indian subcontinent in origin. It's an entirely different branch, if you will, of a big tree. The notion that everything originates from ISIS is a false notion, and it will lull us into a sense of complacency that will get us hurt over and over and over again.
And what Phil talked about was the fact that the Orlando attacker and the San Bernardino attacker were out of the same Pakistani Pashtun Muslim terror network. They really didn't have anything to do with ISIS. But the narrative was that these were all part of ISIS, and it just simply wasn't true. So the next one is Aleppo.
Public pronounces to the contrary. Russia has done little to counter Daesh, but a great deal to bolster the Assad regime and its allies. And together, Russia and the Assad regime are deliberately weaponizing migration from Syria in an attempt to overwhelm European structures and break European resolve.
Now, that was General Craig Breedlove, who I believe is still the supreme commander of NATO in Europe. He's an American general, And what he was saying was that, look, Russia went into Syria with the stated intent that they were going to defeat ISIS, but very little of what they've done has been to defeat ISIS. I mentioned this in a December 26th update I did the day after Christmas. You might want to watch that about some of the things going on in Syria. It's very complicated. There's blood on everybody's hands over there, including ours, but the United States. But what they did was they effectively weaponized people. They bombed their cities where they were living, the rebel people, mostly all Sunni, and they left and they moved someplace else. They didn't go to other Sunni Muslim countries in the Middle East. They went to Europe, and a lot have come here, and they've collapsed. A lot of the governments of Europe are in a state of extreme collapse, especially Sweden and Germany, because of the overwhelming numbers of young military-age Muslim males that have come into those cultures. And it was a very clever thing to do. It was like we get the Sunnis out of here that we don't want, and we just stabilize Europe at the same time. That lets us do more of what we want. It's in a chess move, we're, as I've said, we're playing with checkers, and Putin is playing with a board full of queens. And I mean, he's just moving all over the place, and it's difficult. And he has interests that he's trying to protect, but you've got to strip away and look sort of a little bit behind some of the stuff that you see, that he's this great good guy. I don't buy that for a minute. But you know how you respect a poisonous snake, kind of give it a wide berth. Same way with Putin, because he'll strike when it's to do his own thing. And then we had these series of terror attacks in Israel, knifings, the family up here, the mother of 7 or 8 young children stabbed in front of her kids as she tried to protect them from a Arab terrorist. This is a IDF soldier down here that was stabbed outside the Damascus Gate in Jerusalem and killed. A young gal, you see her friends there huddled and crying. I'm going to skip over Ban Ki-moon. We know that early in the year he was really all over Israel, but then on his way out of his duties at the UN, he said, we got to stop this crazy bias against Israel, which he's participated in for all these years. Now that he has to go back to the real world and not the UN bubble there in New York, he has to actually be conversant with things like facts and truth and not being biased against Israel so badly. So, but he admitted it. Here is what, at the Munich Security Conference, this is what the King of Jordan had to say about Israel.
It is time for a new level of global action, focusing on our resources, coordinating our responsibilities, and synchronizing our military and security efforts. Our countries, our international institutions, must work collectively as a truly global alliance. And the community of nations cannot talk about universal rights and global justice, but continue to deny statehood to Palestinians.
And do you see the sort of the New World Order thing that even he is talking about? An Arab Muslim. Now, before the kingdom of Transjordan, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan was created, and really that's where the Palestinian Arabs were supposed to go and live, east of the Jordan River. West of the Jordan River was to be Israel, until the Saud family defeated his grandfather. They were the ones, his family was the ones in control of Mecca. He claims to be a direct descendant of Muhammad himself. And so now they're effectively in charge of the Temple Mount. And we know what's been going on with the Temple Mount this year. Now, even the United States denies history and facts. One of the hot areas is the Golan Heights, and here is this spokesperson for the State Department, I can't remember his name, used to be a rear admiral, I believe. And, of course, he's asked a question about the Golan Heights, and here's what he says is the United States position on that.
I would, however, reiterate that the U.S. position on the status of the Golan Heights.
By the way, he knows how he's kind of trying to get, his neck's getting a little tight. And remember the Untouchables movie where Kevin Costner says, when the guy goes, maybe it was him or the prosecutor said, I love it when he goes for the tie, loosen the tie. So he had a little shirt collar problem there.
Is longstanding and is unchanged. Every administration on both sides of the aisle since 1967 has maintained that those territories are not part of Israel. The conditions under which those territories are ultimately returned should be decided through negotiations between the respective parties. And obviously, Saeed, the current situation in Syria makes it difficult to continue those efforts at this time.
So we don't think Israel is entitled to the Golan Heights, at least the government doesn't. But Israel knows. So there's an attack on the Temple Mount. UNESCO says they have no interest there. Our government, even, we talked last week about the fallout from Resolution 2334. Kerry makes this stupid speech about how he thinks there's going to be peace in the Middle East or what it will take. And he has 6 points, none of which relate to facts or history. And again, I'll tie this all up at the end. But the Jews are making plans for the Temple Mount, and this was released probably 7 or 8 months ago. They actually released plans for a temple that they're going to build on the Temple Mount. They actually have architectural and engineering plans to do this. The thinking is that they could do this very quickly. They have the priestly robes. They have the silver trumpets. They have the instruments. I've seen a lot of them. There's a giant menorah just off the Wailing Wall Plaza that you can see. And here they are in the interior of the temple. These are renderings of what they expect to build in the near future. And the interesting thing up here, it kind of goes by kind of fast, but you're going to see as they kind of go up to the upper levels. I think I have it in this clip. And this is actually talked about in Scripture. It's the triple tier crown of the Messiah, because that's what they're looking for. Now we know that, we know all about. There's some things that are going to happen there, but this is actually what they are planning to build in Jerusalem. And here they are in the holy place. Now, I don't know about the veil thing, okay? I think they may put it back up, but from my theological perspective, that thing tore, okay? So, not looking for somebody to sew it back up and to go back to the law, because Jesus tore it. In Hebrews talks about the finished work of the Messiah. So that was kind of interesting. Here's Melanie Phillips at a conference talking about the two-state solution.
If you negotiate with an aggressor with a non-negotiable agenda, that's not a negotiation, not a peace process, it's surrender. To end the conflict in the Middle East, you need to treat the aggressor as a pariah, not as a potential statesman, not as an equal participant in some mythical negotiation, not as someone who is entitled to anything. While they are trying to destroy Israel, they are not entitled to anything. Only if they end that war can the discussions start. In the 1970s, Yasser Arafat cooked up a strategy with his friends in the KGB and in East Germany. That strategy was to change the narrative from Arab aggression against Israel to Palestinian victimization by Israel, and that strategy has been carried out successfully to the letter. The extent of this achievement is not only those sympathetic to the Palestinian cause arguing for a Palestine state, which the Arabs make no bones about it, is intended to be nothing more than a staging post for the extermination of Israel. Not only have they achieved, in large measure, support for that in the West, but opponents of this so-called two-state solution are being drawn in to argue on this very same issue of land boundaries. Both sides are arguing on the wrong issue. That is why the Middle East conflict has no solution. To get a solution, you've got to define the problem correctly. This is the solution to the wrong problem. For a real solution to the Arab war against Israel, we need a radical strategic shift and to change the narrative altogether. Thank you.
And she's right, because this is what the left does in history and politics. They change the narrative. They change the facts. They change the history. They change the story. And that's what they've been doing for a long time. Now, we know that the U.S. didn't veto Resolution 2334 on December 23rd. There's been a lot of fallout from that, and there will continue to be. But this is, I'm going to go back to 2015, June of 2015, Samantha Power testifying in front of a congressional committee. And just listen to her and think like, they've been planning this for a long time. Just listen and see if you agree.
And I want to underscore that the United States would oppose any resolution that we believe is biased or would undermine Israel's security.
But will the United States, yes or no, veto any resolution at the UN that imposes this two-state solution on Israel? What will our position be? Will we veto? You say we oppose, but will we veto? That would send a strong message.
Again, given that we worked last summer on a UN Security Council resolution with Israel that we were potentially prepared to support, and we weren't able to get everybody on the council to rally around, I think it's perilous to make blanket statements, but I want to underscore we have consistently opposed, we will oppose anything that is biased, anything that would undermine Israel's.
Okay. This is where, the guy from South Carolina would step in and yell liar, right? And I guess he was out that day. So, and she just didn't answer the question. Okay, that's always, look, I'm a lawyer, I'm a trial lawyer. When you take a deposition and somebody is not answering the question and skirting around the truth all the time, it's a pretty good indication that they're lying, okay? Because if they don't know, they say, I don't know. But, there's some things that they should know, like the name of their business. I've had people, what's the name of your business? I don't know. So I know I'm in for a long day with that guy. But we know where this all ends. Here's the clip from 5.5, almost 6 years ago. Richard Engel on NBC Nightly News giving his opinion at the beginning of the Arab Spring, what he thought was going to happen.
You're back here in New York for a few days. The question I've seen most people ask you, where does this all end?
This whole movement in the Middle East, and I'm worried about it, because while people in the region deserve more rights and they want more rights and they're embracing more of the will of the Arab street, well, the will of the Arab street is also ferociously anti-Israel, against Israel. And there's many people who believe that if you empower the Arab street, and the Arab street wants to see a war or wants to see more justice for the Palestinians, that down the road, 3 to 5 years, this could lead to a major war with Israel. It could also force a negotiated settlement. But I think over time, this thing ends in Jerusalem.
Hey, I do too. Okay. A lot of people happy about Donald Trump. And there are things that he's going to do that I'll agree with. I'm sure I have low expectations. I'm sure there's things I'll be very disappointed about. So if you have low expectations, you're less likely to be unhappy. And there's a blog by Michael Horton, professor, I think, at Westminster out in California, who talked about evangelicals should be deeply troubled by Donald Trump's attempt to mainstream heresy. Now, I don't think Donald Trump knows, okay? I'm going to assume that he doesn't know. I'm not going to make a judgment on whether he's saved or not. I haven't really seen evidence that he is, but that's between him and God. That's not a call I ever get to make. But I am concerned about people like Paula White being given a position of prominence at the inauguration. because I think people will, she's supposed to pray and speak, I believe. She is a word faith heretic, folks. She is a false teacher. Here's a picture of her from almost a decade ago using the Ark of the Covenant as a fundraising technique. Thank you for approaching the mercy seat. Send your check to whatever. Folks, this is a con job, okay? She's on her third or fourth marriage. She was running around Rome holding hands with Benny Hinn while he was separated from his wife. I think he's got divorced and then remarried his wife. She's married a guy from some rock band. I used to go to Tampa a lot. My firm has an office there. And her church was right there near the airport. It's now, I don't know, they've torn it down. They went bankrupt. They defaulted. I think they owed over $10 million on the mortgage when they went under. She's now pastoring another church in Florida. So, look, my concern is that somebody will take her as some kind of legitimate pastor or evangelical, and she's not. So if you know friends that are confused about that, let them know. This is kind of interesting. I just looked at her website, and this is one of her latest offerings, which I just find kind of laughable. 31 days of discernment. How to reap blessings and break curses. And there's product all over the place. By the way, she has a condo in Trump Tower in New York. And there's a video out there. You can find it on YouTube back in 2008 on her TV show interviewing Donald Trump. And look, the tradition that Trump has followed, the Norman Vincent Peale, positive thinking, that's her. Okay, that's what she teaches. So there would be an affinity to that. And so, look, I'm willing to exercise grace with Trump because I don't think he knows any better. But I have a problem with evangelical pastors who went and prayed with her over Donald Trump. I mean, personally, if I was, like, the chance that I would get invited to that is like, can't calculate it, so small. But if I saw Kenneth Copeland and her and Joyce Meyer, and I'm out of there, okay, hopefully before the video cameras catch me. Because that just doesn't end well for you, so I'm concerned about that. There is some good news. The same judge, there have been these lawsuits about the rules, the transgender rules that have been issued by Department of Education, Department of Justice, and other places in the Obama administration. And what they've done is there's a law, there's a Civil Rights Act out there that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. So what the Obama administration says is, well, sex means, and this is what they're doing, they're messing with the truth. Sex means anything related to sex, not male-female, which is what the original statute meant, but anything related to sex. So they've issued rules that hospitals that have a religious orientation have to do abortions. They've issued rules that schools have to have transgender bathrooms or let people who identify as a female go to the female bathroom and locker room. Because truth and science doesn't mean anything to these people. They're postmodern. It's all to achieve a purpose. It's all to further their power. Fortunately, there's a judge down in Texas who's now issued twice injunctions against this nonsense, and he just issued another one the other day against the rules, the transgender rules, and he said, look, sex means male-female difference. If you want to issue these other rules, go get Congress to enact a law that lets you do it. But see, they don't care. Obama never cared about that. His administration never cared about that. Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder, they never cared about what the law actually said. It was what they could do and push through. Now, fortunately, I think these things can be overturned very quickly in the Trump administration. By the way, If the judge had turned down the injunction and allowed these rules to go in force, where do you think that would have been in the New York Times or the LA Times? Front page, above the fold, big type. Okay, this is page 17 of the New York Times. You see that down there? That's where that little headline comes from. If we don't talk about it, it doesn't really exist. The Washington Post puts out a thing for Metro riders, and they're talking about these women are getting together to chat. You know, they're going to march on Washington on January 20th. They're going to shut everything down, and it's supposedly over 100,000 women now. They're coming to protest the misogynist, the anti-woman Donald Trump. And so they put out this thing for the Express. You pick this up when you ride the Metro in D.C., the subway. And it says, a modest start of a massive march for women. Okay, now what's wrong with the picture? It's the male symbol. They had thousands of them out there. Then they issued one with the female symbol. They are massively confused on many levels now. The delusion that we talk about in the end times, I think it's pretty close to fully operational at this point. Praising a woman march by using the male symbol. Oops. We had the terror attack, well, whatever attack it was, in Fort Lauderdale Friday. 5 people killed. Here's a little story on CBS from a bystander of that. Somebody who actually witnessed it.
Tonight, Omar Villafranca is learning more about the victims. He also has one man's harrowing story of survival.
A man yelled out, "This guy's got a gun, get down." And then we all dropped to the floor.
Steve Frappier had just arrived from Atlanta when the suspected gunman started his rampage. Frappier dropped to the floor and watched from a few feet away as Esteban Santiago calmly walked through the baggage claim and shot travelers ducking for cover.
The shooter the entire time for the ordeal never said a single word. He was cool as a cucumber the entire time. That's when I knew this guy's trained. I'm on the ground and I'm watching people 10 to 15 feet in front of me get hit in the head.
Olga Wolterling was one of the 5 people killed. The Marietta, Georgia resident was a great-grandmother and was celebrating her husband's 90th birthday. Her family released a statement saying her bright smile and loving manner will be missed by all who had the fortune to know her. She rarely seemed to meet a stranger. Rather, she had a smile or a hug for all. She was a blessing in the lives of family and friends. 62-year-old Terry Andre was also killed. A 12-year volunteer with the Virginia Beach Fire Department, his colleagues said he was well-liked and respected for both his dedication to being a volunteer as well as his professional approach to his job as a support tech. We mourn his passing as we do all the victims of the senseless attack in Fort Lauderdale. Frappier is lucky to be alive. During the chaos, he felt a small pinch on the square of his back under his backpack, but didn't think anything of it. When he checked his bag, he found that a bullet had pierced his Apple computer and was rolling around in his backpack.
It was the laptop, the plastic casing, and the type of backpack that I had. The best thank you gift I ever got in my life.
9 victims were admitted here for treatment. Rena, 1 victim was released today.
Omar, thank you.
There's a guy who is a former CIA interrogator named James Mitchell. He's been interviewed recently. He was on Dennis Prager. He's been on Secure Freedom Radio, Frank Gaffney's radio program. He's the one who did waterboarding. Okay, now I know a lot of people don't like waterboarding. They claim it's torture. And you'll see in the interview, he's got a book out where he talks about enhanced interrogation techniques. And he said, we only use waterboarding on a dozen or so people. He said, I probably waterboarded more Department of Justice lawyers than I did terrorist suspects. Now, if you don't like lawyers, you're thinking like, well, that's actually a kind of a good thing, you know. And he did a deputy attorney general. He waterboarded him. The guy said it's not torture. It's not very comfortable. It's not very pleasant, but I don't think it's torture. But he said this in this article. Former CIA interrogator looks inside the jihadist mind. Listen to what he says. I think the American public needs to have a debate about how they want to protect themselves, Mitchell stated in reflection upon enhanced interrogation technique controversies. Recalling how he won repeated official approval for EITs, he stated that I waterboarded almost as many lawyers as I did terrorists, including a Department of Justice Attorney General. Now, the people who were doing this wanted legal protection. They went to Congress to get it, and John McCain, among others, said, listen, we're not going to give it to you, but at your trial, we'll take into consideration the fact that you came to ask for legal protection. In other words, when you're put on trial for this. And they did find information from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was one, the guy who was the mastermind behind 9/11. They got information from him that helped save people in other potential terror attacks. He goes on to say this. Absent such reflected debate, if this obsessive political correctness continues, we're going to be standing on the moral high ground looking down into our smoking hole that used to be several blocks in Los Angeles. I agree with him. It's a big problem. It's a big problem in Turkey where terrorist attacks are going on. There was the nightclub attack. There was another attack in Istanbul this week, a bombing attack. Gatestone Institute reported that 13,000 people in the last 17 months have been killed in terror attacks in Turkey, just in Turkey. And, we get upset about 5 in Fort Lauderdale, and we should, but there's thousands and thousands being killed daily in what used to be called Iraq, what used to be called Syria, in Turkey and other countries. This is a major problem, and you would think that people would care about it. But instead, we got a guy who goes into a mosque in Baltimore and says, yeah, for 1,000 years, people have been drawn to Islam's message of peace. Peace is, maybe it should be. A little bit about this conference coming up next Sunday, Middle East Peace Conference. It involves 70 nations. Now, I'll talk about that in a moment. There are things that happen, though, that I think sort of go outside the realm of coincidence. Now, I'm fairly confident that the people who schedule the Paris Peace Conference, the foreign minister of France and other people, are not conversant with Orthodox Judaism and the readings that are assigned for Orthodox Judaism on particular days of the year. This happens pretty regularly. So what do you think are the assigned readings for next Sunday, January 15th, in Orthodox Judaism? They have a portion from the Torah, a portion from the Psalms, a portion from the prophets. Well, it just so happens, this is from the Chabad.org website. The first portion from the Torah is Exodus chapter 1, verse 1 through 17. Now, what's that about? Well, that's about the Jews in Egypt, the nation of Israel, when they were small in Egypt. And it starts off, and there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And then what happened? The Jews were oppressed for a long time in Egypt until they were rescued in the Exodus. Is it a coincidence that that passage that talks about the oppression of the Jewish people is the assigned reading for the day when 70 nations of the world are to get together to decide what to do about Israel? And I think they're going to try to, it remains to be seen. I know that Netanyahu is concerned about it. The Israeli government is concerned about it. They are lobbying forcefully and continually in the United Nations to get this to stop because they think it might lead to a resolution that recognizes a Palestinian state. And I wouldn't put it past the nations of the world to shove something down Israel's throat. And I think that has huge prophetic significance. Could be. Don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how it all plays out. The Psalms portion, though, is kind of interesting, too. The Psalms portion is Psalm 83 through 87. Psalm 83, Bill Salas, my friend, has written some books on that. That's the one where it says, you know, we want to stop Israel from being a nation. Now, so a portion where they're oppressed, a portion where the surrounding peoples want to have them cease to be a nation, just happens to be the scripture readings that they're supposed to engage in on the day when the nations of the world want to set them aside. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Or as they say, coincidence is not a kosher word. In Genesis chapter 10, it lays out a table of nations. It talks about the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Goes in, it describes the sons of Japheth. Then it describes the sons of Ham and Shem. And it says this, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families, in their nations. It goes on to say, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher, and buildeth Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth, and Calah. It goes. What you find when you read through these passages about the table of nations, I know you can't see that. That's Noah up there, his three sons, and their descendants. We know that next week, at least the news reports say, that 70 nations have been invited. How many nations do you think are in this passage? 70. 70 represents a complete number. We know there's 70 weeks of Daniel, there's 70 nations. When they take a census of the family of Jacob in Israel, they're all there, and how many are there? There are 70. My friend Bill Randalls, by the way, if you want to listen to yourself some good Bible teaching, go to Believers in Grace YouTube channel and listen to Bill. I love Bill. I know Bill. I've been to his church. And Bill, if you think I fill a pulpit, Bill fills a pulpit. I remember he was a wrestler in college. He's a big guy, short but big guy. And somebody said, put your arm around him. I'm not a little guy, as you know. And I'm like halfway across his back with this, okay? But Bill's a phenomenal Bible teacher. And he has a blog. You go read his blog about this. Just type in Bill Randall's blog. The other day, and he cites, this is a fulfillment, he believes, of Psalm chapter 2. And here's what Psalm chapter 2 says. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. I do think what is going on in the world with the nations and the things against Israel is very, very significant prophetically. Very significant. I want you to continue on other things. This continued alliance between Iran, Turkey, and Russia. Now the reports are that Russia is pulling away, pulling troops out of Syria. They're sending their aircraft carrier back to another port, I think, up in Crimea Peninsula, where they took over that a couple years ago. People are saying, wow, it's a miracle that the ship's been at sea for 4 months now and hasn't broken down. It's their only aircraft carrier. But they're pulling back because they've achieved what they want. They got their air base, they got their naval base there in Syria. They've stabilized at least a little part of that for Assad. they don't want to go too far. And Iran wants to go further. Iran wants to, have that influence all the way to the Mediterranean. And Russia, I think, is a little bit nervous about that because they have a historical kind of opposition to Iran. So I think Putin's, he might have too many chess pieces on the board right now, or he's playing too many games of chess. And it's a difficult thing for him to manage. So it's kind of an interesting geopolitical thing. There's an American pastor and been held in Turkey in prison on terror charges for 3 months. Israel picked up a satellite. I had a bigger picture of this, of nuclear-capable missile launchers in Syria on their satellite near Latakia, up there on the Mediterranean coast. So that bears watching. Israel's not going to tolerate this. And I'm sure that as this information comes in, there's phone calls being made between Jerusalem and Moscow about what's going on. Good article in the Jerusalem Post the other day, Syrian scenarios. Will Vladimir Putin back a de facto federal solution for Syria, or will he opt for total victory for the Assad regime, and how will Donald Trump respond? Very interesting geopolitical thing going on there. I don't have time to go into the details of that article. At the same time, we put troops here, Russia responds, and we did some things up there around the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and I don't know what, I'm not make you guess which order those are in. I usually forget. I think Estonia is the middle one, but I'm not. It is? Okay, somebody said it is, so blame him. But anyway, there's the little red area there along the North Sea is a section of Russia that it has, so it has some kind of port that it can use a lot of the year. So they've put a lot of missiles and missile launchers right there. And it's very volatile. I mean, a lot of people are saying this is as close as we ever got to war in the middle of the Cold War. We're at that stage right now. And Obama does stuff, and Putin does stuff, and it's this back and forth. And then Obama does something like all of our aircraft carriers are back in the United States now. I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know if he thinks I know another Charlie Garrett who does a prophecy update each week at his church down in Sarasota, suffering down there in South Florida on the Gulf Coast. But he suggested last week, I think in his update, there's an article out there that suggests that Obama might be a Russian agent. And I have to tell you, as I've looked at things, what has he done that has not ultimately furthered the interests of Russia in the world? I think to me, it's pretty obvious, but I could be wrong. The Rand Corporation has a thing about this thing going on in the Baltics. You can look that up. Here's you can see my slides are all out of order today. Here's that little closer picture of the Latakia satellite picture of the Latakia Air Base, and it's amazing what they can see. The notion that we have a lot of privacy in the world is a little bit, if you still believe that, I think unless you're completely off the grid, people are going to know a lot. And there's cameras everywhere. There's been a push among law firms because of security concerns and hacking. If you represent people in mergers and acquisitions, law firms all over the place. You go to a law firm now, and you're on camera. I mean, people are watching you all the time. I mean, it's the way it is. It's what's being demanded by clients and insurance carriers and that type of thing. So what's the boss going to do? We don't know what he's going to do this week. He's pushing, I think, for something at the Security Council to get a resolution. Oh, well, we have to talk about this. I'm going to try to finish in 10 minutes. This thing in Chicago with this mentally disabled man who was kidnapped, tortured, beaten. They've now charged him with hate crimes, but the initial the initial reports never mentioned the race of anybody involved. And I'm like, would that happen if it was the races were reversed? And you know that it wouldn't. And when the report first came out, it was reported in conservative media, but the New York Times, way down at the bottom of page 17 again, and finally they had to deal with it. When the cops were in it, I was listening to these news conferences Friday, Thursday, as I was driving up to northern Ohio. And the Chicago police are going, well, you know, they're 18, they made stupid decisions. You know, I'm telling you, if cops are saying that, we have such a huge moral problem in this country. Stupid decisions? I mean, to the average person, this was evil. But listen to the discussion on CNN. This is interesting. Mind-blowing, but interesting.
It's a hate crime because Chicago police won't say it. They're saying they're still investigating it. They're not investigating. They're not done with their investigation. But when you look at this, Simone, they're saying F white people, F Trump. How can you say it's not a hate crime against a white person?
So first, I want to say this is absolutely sickening. It's unfathomable that so much hate.
By the way, if you don't know who she is, she was the spokesperson for Bernie Sanders.
And anger can fill up a person where they go out and they think that this is okay. And then it was stupid to do it on Facebook Live, but that's a whole nother story. So this is absolutely sickening. But I'm going to say something that's probably not very popular. We cannot callously go about classifying things as a hate crime. Motive here matters. So was this for hate of Donald Trump, the president-elect, because of things that he has said, or was this for pure hate of white people? That matters, because if we start going around and anytime someone says something or does something really egregious, really bad, and sickening in this instance in connection with the president-elect or Donald Trump, or even President Obama for that matter, because of their political leanings, that is slippery territory. That is not a hate crime. Hate crimes are because of a person's racial ethnicity, their religion, their gender, a disability. It is your political leanings, because someone doesn't like your political leanings and they do something bad to you. That is not a hate crime.
But Alice, even hate crimes, aren't all hate crimes motivated by stupidity? These are 18-year-old kids. And you look at the video, you're like, what is going on? What on earth? Why would anybody ever think that it was okay to treat another person like that for any reason, regardless of it, you know, if it's a disabled person, if it's a mentally physically incapacitated person, if it's a white person or black person, whatever. Why on earth, Matt? I just don't understand it.
You just try to wrap your head around evil. That's what this is. It's evil. It's brutality. It's man's inhumanity to man. And
I don't think it's evil. I don't think it's evil. I think these are young.
Okay, at the risk of
the potential for human aggression,
getting all of you wanting to run headfirst into the walls here, here's Dana Perino, who I think kind of hits on the issue.
the potential for human aggression and depravity is astonishing, and it's moments like this where it doesn't matter to me what color they were, the disability, everything. It was such a horrible, disgusting crime.
Yeah, it was, and I think the depravity. And there's a good article in the New York Times. I didn't have time to put it in. It's one of their reporters. He grew up in Iowa. He goes back to Marion County, Iowa, and he starts talking to like 18-year-olds that clearly are Christians. And he wants to find out why do you guys, why do you feel disconnected from what we think about in New York? And the one kid is like, they're having coffee or something. 7 o'clock. Time to get to work before, so the liberals can continue to sleep in or something like that. And it's the guy really recognizes that there is a really strong, different value component to these people in rural America. Because they don't live in towns where there's hope, but one kid's going to engineering school, the other guy's a welder, and he can't figure it out. I mean, he grew up there. And then he went off to Harvard or someplace, and he's like, look it up on I'll try to put the link to it on the description on YouTube. It's a fascinating article, and it's in the New York Times. That's what's even more interesting about it. I think it was on the 6th. Okay. Well, I ran across this. This is kind of interesting. This is a guy named William E. Blackstone, and he wrote a book called Jesus is Coming. He's really, by a lot of people, considered to be the first Christian Zionist. And I was just, as I was researching things, his name came up a couple times. He was the first dean of a new institution, educational institution in California, Los Angeles, that was called the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. It was the first dean. Today we know that as BIOLA, Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And he wrote this book called Jesus is Coming. His chapter 15 talks about Israel is to be restored. This book was first published around 1900. This is a copy that I found. It's at the University of Michigan Library, published in third edition in 1908. By that time, it had sold nearly 400,000 copies. It had been translated into 20 languages. And so a lot of what we think about Christian Zionism really came from William Blackstone. He was a Chicago businessman. He helped in the founding of Moody Bible Institute. And so in 1908, the third edition, he was born in 1841. Moody was founded about 1880, and he eventually just did sort of like what the rich young ruler didn't do. He sold everything and then went into missions and traveled the world, passed out copies of this to pastors all over the world, and was really a great force for the church in those days. And so by 1908, he was 67 when this was in its third edition. He lived until 1935. He was 94, I think, when he died. So he lived a long life, and you can look up what he says about the restoration of Israel. He looks at Ezekiel 36, and I don't have time to read it this morning, but he says, we might fill a book with comments upon how Israel shall be restored, but all we have desired to do is to show that it is an incontrovertible fact of prophecy, and that it is intimately connected with our Lord's appearing, and this we trust we have satisfactorily accomplished. A great little book, and I don't have time to go into the interesting takeaway from it. He talks about Ezekiel 36, and he looks at verses 1 and then 5 through 10 or 11. And the interesting thing is, in the middle, between verse 1 and verse 8, I guess it was where he jumped to, it talks about, it's not so much a restoration of the people, it's about the land, okay? It's not so much as much about the people as it is about the land. And that's where this prophecy centers, is the land of Israel, the mountains of Israel. Okay, we'll finish up with this. This IDF soldier was convicted of manslaughter for what happened around Hebron a few months ago. A terrorist had made an attack. He was subdued. And he says he shot him and killed him because he thought he was going to do something else, might have a suicide vest on or that type of thing. And look, when we get into trials in these situations, hindsight is 20/20 all the time. I mean, everybody knows it's easy to figure out. But in the heat of the moment, and so there's a lot of calls for him to be pardoned, especially by Prime Minister Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett. The defense ministers come out and say, we're going to live with the verdict. The IDF needs to learn to conduct themselves. So there's this big to-do in Israel about what are we going to do with this guy, and is this right? Caroline Glick has a great article on Friday. Don't have time to go into it. You should look it up, Jerusalem Post, Caroline Glick. If you're on Facebook, you can go to my timeline, you'll find it. And the concern is that when these things happen, eventually what happens is that the soldiers become more fearful of taking action. There was the Goldstone report from Operation Cast Lead about 10 years ago, and a lot of what the Goldstone report was based on a movie that was virulently anti-Israel and anti-IDF, and it's affected how people in the world think about Israel. It's rewriting the narrative. The U.S. House and Senate have backed resolutions censuring Obama and his administration for what they did. Prime Minister Netanyahu had a great, and I'll just play a little bit of it real quickly.
The outrageous anti-Israel resolution at the UN. The U.S. House of Representatives voted yesterday resoundingly to support Israel and reject this one-sided resolution. Democrats and Republicans alike know that the Western Wall isn't occupied territory. They voted to either repeal the resolution at the UN or change it, and that's exactly what we intend to do. I want to thank the U.S. House of Representatives, which reflects the tremendous support Israel enjoys among the American people. Thank you, America. Thank you, Congress.
Well, John Kerry was interviewed the other. No video. Okay, calm down. But he's still in a position of influence right now, and we have to deal with what damage these guys are going to do on the way out the door. They've got 12 more days. He was interviewed by CBS. I haven't been able to find a video of it, but they did have a transcript of it on the State Department website. And so he was asked some questions by David Martin. He's a security reporter, national security issues for CBS. He said this: what would happen if the U.S. backed away from a two-state solution? I'll try to do my Kerry imitation. Well, I think that would be extraordinarily dangerous for Israel, our friend. And if you are a true friend of Israel, and I consider myself a true friend of Israel, Martin then went on to say, what would happen if the U.S. were to move its embassy to Jerusalem? You'd have an explosion, an absolute explosion in the region. Not just in the West Bank and perhaps even in Israel itself, but throughout the region. The Arab world has enormous interest in the Haram al-Sharif, as it is called, the Temple Mount, the Dome, and it is a holy site for the Arab world. It's a holy site for the Jewish world. I guess I can't pound on this thing either. I need a pillar up here that I can. It's just unbelievable. Listen, Abbas said it would be an explosion. The king of Jordan came out and said it would be an explosion. Everybody says it would be an explosion. Because, if Israel does something like if the U.S. moves their embassy to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, there will be an explosion. That will cause the Arabs and the Muslims to be upset. Really? That'll be the cause? This video this morning, I've edited out. This is in Jerusalem this morning, just a few hours ago. Those are all soldiers. They're up there by the bus and then down here in the foreground. Now, I edited out what happens. You can see the result of what happened there. According to Prime Minister Netanyahu, an ISIS-inspired terrorist drives a truck into the group the faraway group. Let's see, it should be coming here. And I have the impact edited out. I mean, you can find, and you see the truck go up. The truck goes up. Now, look, these are all soldiers. These are great people, young people. You see them all over Israel. The truck backs up. He's going to go back and run them over again. A bystander who was carrying a weapon pulled it out and shot, as they say in Jerusalem, neutralized the perp. 4 or 5 Jewish soldiers are dead. Young soldiers are dead. And we haven't moved our embassy, and these terrorist animals are doing this anyway. Let's tell the truth. A great article, How Liberal Professors Are Ruining College. In New England, they did a study, and they found that in 1989, the ratio of liberal to conservative in New England professors was 5-to-1. 18 years later, 25 years later or so, it's 28 to 1. What do you think these kids are living? I'll finish with this. There's no future in history. This is an article in the Canada Free Press by Dr. Alexander Nussbaum just the other day. Progressives write history as it ought to be. Not history as it was, but as it ought to have been. Outright lies are fine, for particulars do not matter as long as they illustrate a greater truth. It has become politically correct to teach that Muslims invented algebra, zero, and Arabic numerals. Muslims invented none of these, though they introduced or reintroduced these to the Western world after the First Dark Ages. Muslims did not invent algebra. And he goes on to say, we live in a world where the body of global governance denies that Jews have any connection to the Temple Mount or to Israel. It's insanity. And I have to tell you, I think John Kerry and Barack Obama and Susan Rice and Samantha Power kind of believe it. At least they believe that the Jews are these horrible oppressors. And we have to have the social justice warriors. And this is postmodernism. This is what people do. They twist the truth. I did a talk in 2001 out in California to a group of pastors and church leaders, and I talked about the coming effects of postmodernism on American culture. It was something that I saw and I was reading, and so I talked about it. One of the examples I used was this ridiculous building down at Ohio State University called the Wexner Center for the Arts. It was considered to be the first postmodern building in the world. It's a monstrosity. It doesn't make any sense. You see things like these hallways that look like they're going straight, but they go down. There's beams in the middle of the air that don't go anywhere. They're hanging columns. There used to be a staircase there. I think they changed it. That just went up into a ceiling. Ravi Zacharias used this as an example in some of his talks about postmodernism and asked the guy, what were you trying to do? He goes, well, the building can be anything that you want. I mean, it's free. We're free to do whatever we want. And Zacharias asked him, did you take that same approach to the foundation? No. So Dr. Nussbaum goes on, certainly the above view would be out of character for the New York Times, a Marxist postmodernist publication. The paper published an op-ed article by Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas that stated that the Arabs accepted the UN partition plan of 1947. It's a lie. Michael Oren wrote in Ally, My Journey Across the American-Israeli Divide, that protesting to Andrew Rosenthal, the then Times editorial page editor, led to the following exchange. First person speaking is Oren. Did anybody check after whether Abbas has his facts exactly backwards? That's your opinion, Rosenthal replied. I'm an historian, Andy, and there are opinions and there are facts. That the Arabs rejected partition and the Jews accepted it is an irrefutable fact, Rosenthal, in your view. Oren then comes back. Tell me, on June 6, 1944, did Allied forces land or did they not land on Normandy Beach? Rosenthal, the son of a Pulitzer Prize-winning Times reporter and famed executive editor, replied, some might say so. Nussbaum goes on with this, like it did with the study of literature, and like it has done with architecture and art, the left has murdered history by exerting control over it. The left is now murdering science. Transgenderism, remember what I talked about at the beginning? I said I would tie this up at the end. We just saw how left use polling, which relies on inferential statistics, as just spin to promote a candidate. You can prove anything with statistics, many have cynically said, but a greater truth is that you cannot prove anything without statistics. Statistics are the only acceptable currency of proof in science, and both are imperiled by progressives. By subjugating everything to a political agenda, the left is now bringing disrepute to science. There is a full-scale left-wing rewriting of science to eliminate deviationism. People are rightly doubting that man-made global warming is the greatest threat facing us. As Marxist.com explains in Global Warming, a Marxist perspective, quote, the dialectical nature of climate change is a striking confirmation of the philosophy of dialectical materialism developed by the founders of scientific socialism, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. But people are now also doubting all of science. and this is true. This is a concern I have even in the Christian community with a lot of theories that run around before we know what the facts are. People are opining that this is what happened and this is why it happened. And you can't know that in 10 minutes. You can't know that while the event is unfolding. And what happens is, even in the Christian community, people are losing the ability to discern truth from error. And I would suggest to you that is a huge problem in the church. And I talked about it in 2001. I got pushback from pastors who said, oh, John, postmodernism will be a good thing for the church. 16 years later, 15 years later, I think history and culture have proved me to be correct. And there's a spiritual basis for that. What will the world look like in 25 years? He says, a new dark ages is starting. Under the leadership of the left, Western civilization and all its achievement is dying and leaving the corpse for ISIS to infect. Politically correct intellectuals have reduced history to nothing more than leftist fascist supporting fabrications. So have a little sympathy for the 20-something-year-old who never heard of Bull Run or Antietam, but knows the Confederate flag should be banned from battle recreations. And if he has heard of General Lee, thinks it's just the car on the Duke of Hazzard, also to be banned. And guess what? Science is fast going down the same path. Thanks to progressive, there is no past. And if there is no past, there is no future. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul writing in the last things, some of the last words that he wrote, this also know in the last times, perilous times shall come, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers lusts, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And then in chapter 4, he said this, for the time will come, this is talking about the professing church. This is scary stuff, folks. It's why we talk about the things that we talk about here at Fellowship Bible Chapel. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. You don't have to suffer. You're a king's kid. Send a check to Paula White. Everything will be okay. You'll be able to approach your mercy seat. By the way, that never happened. It's not in the Bible. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. We live in really, when I said at the beginning it's war, it is war. It's a war on the truth, and we need to be soldiers in God's army, clothed with the armor of God. Go read Ephesians chapter 6. It has pretty good eschatological reference at the end. Feet shod with the gospel of peace. Do a word study on that. So listen, tough times. They may not change in 12 days. I don't expect them to. But we have God, we have the Word, we have Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God will get us through if we're faithful and reject the nonsense of the world's narrative. Let's pray. Father, I just pray that you'll pour out your Spirit on all of us here and those that are listening, and keep us strong in the faith. Give us the desirability to put on the full armor of God so that we can stand against the devil, against untruth, against false teaching. And Lord, I pray if there's anybody listening that has never accepted the free offer of salvation through your grace, through the death of your Son, Jesus Christ on the cross, I pray that they will not delay in taking care of that critical thing so that they too can be filled with the Holy Spirit. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.